The law arrived before the fleet. We translated in on a seam of auroral green that trembled like breath across glass. I was Commander Mara Ansel, senior envoy of the Human Compact and the ship that carried us. UNS Quietus smelled faintly of citrus solvent and warm circuitry. Outside, the Cathari Tithe Gate turned slowly in the dark, its collars lit like patient eyes over every trade lane into the cradle net. We had come armed with filings quorum codes and a beacon older than any of us. Within 300 words, the first summons would fly, and an inquiry by Starcourt Custom would not be denied. "We're live on all civilian bands," said Lieutenant Jiro Sato. His voice controlled, his hands restless on the console's edge. Translation harmonics stable. The gate broadcasts their gratitude tax doctrine on loop. Rian Duer, our legal counselor, stood shoulder to shoulder with me, eyes flicking between statute rubrics and audience metrics. "We want them to say it fresh," she murmured. "Not recycled chant. On the record in front of a witness quorum." The shipmind caliber painted the void with soft outlines of incoming traffic like chalk on slate. "We would win by witness, not wounds. The magistrate will try to route us into a private channel," Ria added, tightening the silver clasp of her collar mic. "Decline anything without quorum." I nodded and felt the Quietus vibrate as her field coils shifted their hum. Scents layered the metallic tang of recycled air, a whisper of burned dust from a status lamp replaced too fast. "Caliber," I said, "loosen the throttle on public visual. I want minors and mothers to see what ordinary power looks like when it refuses to be loud." "Broadcast widened," Caliber replied, voice like low strings at dusk. 14,000 live connections, 72 flagged as relevant guilds, 2 Cathari reliquaries watching. Jiro glanced back. "We're going to be very, very quotable." I could taste the ozone of a coming storm on my tongue, though nothing moved. "Let them speak their method, where everyone can hear." Syndic Magistrate Thalin of the Cathari Compact appeared as a precise blue geometry, a man trimmed into shapes by a lifetime of measured concessions. "Humans," he said, tone almost tender, "you arrive during our accounting cycle. That is, apt." His backdrop showed the collars, those radiant rings that could cinch a lane to a stop, squeezing commerce until gratitude spilled out like coins. Ria lifted her hand. "Syndic Magistrate Ria Endower, Counsel for Commander Ansel. By Article 7 of the Common Starlit Concord, we notice a public inquiry regarding your gratitude tax doctrine and its enforcement by restraint collars." Thalen's geometry tilted, amused. "Do you propose to litigate in the corridor of law rather than the field of fire?" I let a smile touch without warming. "Our doctrine is simple," I said. "When a neighbor takes your corridor, you ask what they say they are doing, and you ask them to say it where everyone can hear." He studied me like a creditor assessing a stubborn debtor. "Proceed," he said. "We are not ashamed of gratitude. No blade is sharper than a recorded oath." Before the set piece began, we ran the first civilian loop across the shared screen. A dockhand on Gable Station with grease in her hair said, "We pay the tithe, and the gate opens." A teacher in a belt school whispered, "My students count credits they never see." A trader held up a ledger showing 10% skimmed, then 20, then 30 for protection services. A nurse from the Night Wing and Halcyon Habitat said, "We delayed a med freighter while the collar rep tallied his cut." A child asked, "What does gratitude weigh?" An old spacer laughed and said, "Enough to sink you slowly. Receipts are the quiet gravity that pulls lies down." "Public quorum established," Caliber announced. "Note, audience skew is civilian heavy. Recommend tone accordingly." The Quietus adjusted our position by 1/2 kilometer, just enough to set the ancient beacon in the frame. It was black stone cut into law, a Starcourt gavel from a prior age retrofitted as a broadcast amplifier. Ria raised her voice. Syndic Magistrate Thalen, please define the gratitude tax, its rate, and its enforcement mechanism. Please specify the legal predicate for the Collars under Concord Code. Thalen folded his hands. The gratitude tax is a fee for securing routes. We rescued this sector from the raiders you could not defeat. The rate floats according to risk. Enforcement is the collar, which is merely a gate management tool. The predicate, he said smoothly, is the doctrine of custodial burden. If one bears a neighbor's burden in peril, the neighbor owes ongoing consideration. I felt Rhea lean into the edge she had carved. Ongoing means what? He didn't blink. Until custodial risk ceases. And who decides that the custodian? The first mercy is making the rule visible. Caliber. I said quietly, tag the words rescued, risk, ongoing, and custodian. Build a cloud that breathes when he repeats them. The ship mind complied, and the words swelled like jellyfish above his head, fattening whenever he returned to them. Jiro chuckled. Like a carnival game. Like an admission meter, Rhea corrected. Thalen watched the cloud without expression. You decorate your point, he said. It remains your problem that you needed rescue. My anger rose hot and clean. I kept it caged. We are not disputing rescue, I said. We are disputing the collar that never unlocks and the hand that never stops taking. Numbers remember what fear tries to blur, Commander Caliber said into my inner channel. I project that a strict legal path exists if you are willing to accept a small local harm for a large systemic precedent. A sacrifice would be efficient. The shipmind's candor tasted like cold iron. Name it, I answered, though my stomach tightened. We could allow a Cathari collar to cinch a humanitarian lane for exactly 12 seconds while we establish a public escrow and return flow. The measurable delay would quantify coercion. Rhea heard the last words and shook her head. A med lane not med caliber said water recycling valves to an outpost with 24 hours reserve. An open quorum is a shield you cannot confiscate. I stepped away from the rail and looked at the beacon. Its surface drank starlight until it glowed like ink. We don't starve anybody to make a point, I said softly. We include them. Rhea nodded, relieved. We can run the escrow on our own fuel and throw the receipts in their face. Jiro tapped his console. Magistrate requests that we shift to private review of documents. He looked back at me. I shook my head once. Declined, he transmitted. We remain in public corridor. Thalen's jaw tightened, a small truth accidentally escaping. Very well. We will proceed with the chorus. If they tally us, we will tally the terms. Caliber's field masts extended like quiet bones, and the ancient beacon woke its seams brightening. The hum rolled through the deck, through the soles of my boots, into my calves like a tuning fork set on justice. Begin formal inquiry, Rhea said. Question 1. Did you place collars without bilateral consent? We placed them with notice, Thalen said, and with gratitude from those rescued. Gratitude is emotion, not consent, Rhea replied. Question 2. Are the rates published and challengeable? Rates are calculated by our internal risk committee. His cloud swelled around risk until it wobbled like a heavy crown. Return is not revenge, it is balance restored. Before Thalen could settle his tone, we ran a second civilian loop. A botanist on Arc-Scale Farm 3 described cutting rations to fit the tithe. A long-haul pilot rubbed his wrists and said, "We fly with collars in our dreams now." A shopkeeper showed 2 tablets, one with prices before salvation, one after the gratitude tax. A singer with cracked lips sang 5 notes from a lullaby and stopped because the air cost more that night. A miner coughed fine dust and said, "The collar squeezes through to the lungs." The beacon of law burns without heat, but it burns. Magistrate, I said, do you agree that a tax which expands with risk, you define and enforce with collars you control, is functionally indefinite? He smiled like a man invited to his own defense. Commander, your people of all species understand debt. Your fleets ran on loans after your plagues. You paid. You did not seek to cancel for sentiment. Rhea cut in. We seek to cancel for overreach. The Concord envisages gratitude as finite. Thalin lifted one finger. The Concord envisages gratitude as honorable. We agree. Then state your finite end, I said. He opened his hands and declined to answer without declining. Make them choose in public, and they will choose themselves. Caliber traced a small arc on my retinal feed. The corridor of law gambit Callow used at Dare's Edge had a flaw, the ship mind whispered. They forgot to build a mirror. Explain, I whispered back. They recorded the harm but did not route the cost home while everyone watched. If we invert the toll gate's escrow anchors, we can return skimmed port fees to the last 20 stations simultaneously. Not as attack, merely as repayment with receipts. Rhea read the subtext like music. They'll call it theft. I shook my head. They'll call it theft while everyone watches their own credits go home. A record steadies a trembling world. We built the path quickly because people were watching, and because we had practiced in unimportant places when nobody was looking. Jiro's fingers flew, his breath audible in the quiet. Anchors linked. Receipts ready for public display. We'll use their own audit format. Caliber's presence filled the edges of my thoughts with cool focus. Commander, I will need you to say the words the ship mind said. Not Rhea. Not Jiro. You. I knew why. Power is declared as often as it is exercised. Syndic Magistrate Thalin, I said clearly, we are returning unjust enrichment from your tolls to the last 20 ports affected. The return will show on your books using your own categories. Justice is a verb you can see. The Cathari geometry flickered. You dare escrow our accounts, Thalin hissed, the first fracture in his composure. You dare file a lien on our gratitude. The beacon chimed softly, as if to bless the semantics. Not a lien, Rhea said, smiling without warmth. A correction. We pressed the key. Credits leapt like fish, breaking a surface, then streaked along the published lines. On the shared screen, a shopkeeper gasped as her balance grew by what had been shaved in quiet. A portmaster blinked. A medtech laughed and then cried into his hands. The collars did not tighten because we had not touched them. The corridor was now a mirror of conduct. Observe, Caliber announced to the quorum that the return did not reduce security coverage, close a gate, or hurt an innocent. Note that the payer's budget for trophies is impacted. Thalin's eyes narrowed. You have chosen spectacle. I shook my head. We have chosen audit. He recovered enough to speak like the magistrate again. Your audit violates our sovereign dignity. Dignity is not a property right, Rhea said softly, and 1,000 civilian listeners sent little pulsing hearts, because even in space law there is poetry sometimes. An oath in daylight rescues the quietest throat. We had our first escalation, then not by design. Caliber marked 3 Cathari escorts translating in near the collars with their weapons powered, albeit low. They'll claim they came to observe, Jiro muttered with their hands on the knife for comfort. I kept my breathing slow and counted 3 cycles of the coil's hum. Put them on the witness list, I said. If they fire, that they do it as witnesses to their own method. Rhea said we should accelerate toward the Aurora court. They'll follow, and the court's custodian cannot ignore arrivals with this many eyes. We moved and took the universe with us like a tide pulling loose stones. The Aurora court had once been a living ship that sat down to die in a drift of magnetized ice. The elders of a dozen worlds had turned its keel into a place to argue instead of bleed. When we slid into its shadow, starlight broke on its ribs and ran like rainfall down a cathedral roof. The air on our bridge smelled cooler in my imagination, though I knew perfectly well temperature had not changed. Court custodian Hale's caliber intoned. A woman's voice came through cracked and warm. "Commander Ansel, you carry a storm in careful bowls. Please place them on my table. A forum isn't holy because it glows. It's holy because it holds." Before the court cut us into the main hearing stream, we ran another civilian frame. A farmer from a ring world held up a seed and said, "This should be enough." A port poet intoned, "We have learned to praise while we sign." A mechanic whispered, "I dream about bolt threads. In the dream, the threads never catch." A child repeated, "What does gratitude weigh?" A midwife answered, "Sometimes an infant." Somewhere a warehouse clerk wearing 3 different guild badges just nodded, eyes red. "Make the cost legible, and you make the choice real." "Custodian Arlen," I said, bowing in voice, "we seek a public inquiry under Article 7 regarding the Cathari gratitude tax and its indefinite enforcement by restraint callers." "You have quorum," she replied gently. "You have audience. Proceed." Thalen's projection joined ours in the great virtual hall that the court shaped from light. Layers of listeners rose like terraces of wheat, each face turned toward the place where a decision could grow and lean its weight. My throat felt like paper. I swallowed. We had built the mirror. Now we needed to keep looking. Rhea led with pace that felt like an old river fast, where it mattered slow, where you wanted to drink. "Define your end state," she said again to Thalen. "At what time or condition does the tax cease?" he smiled. "When risk ceases." "Who measures risk? We do." "Who audits your measure? We do." The audience's murmur rolled like fabric shaken out. Rhea pressed. "Is it true that your callers will adjust? Flow for climate relief only after percentage is satisfied?" He inclined his head. "We are not barbarians. We make exceptions." "At your discretion," she said. He let the words rest like a blade on a napkin. In a rigged game, courtesy is just well-folded paper. Caliber slid me a quiet note. "Your first loop is seeded," the shipmind said. "Reveal is ready when you cue the old contract." I tapped the side of my terminal and brought up a document no one expected us to possess. It was a Cathari internal memo dated 5 cycles ago regarding the permanent gratitude instrument and its conversion from temporary rescue fee to standing revenue pipeline. "Syndic Magistrate." I said, "Can you authenticate this memo?" His head tilted. "I have not seen that document." "But you can recognize your own formats." Rhea said, eyes bright. "Yes," he conceded, "the fonts are ours. A small truth admitted is a door you can walk through. The memo," I said, "shows you move the callers from emergency footing to structural revenue without notice or bilateral consent. It assigns a quarterly target. It also employs the phrase, normalize dependency." The court hummed like a hive that has just smelled smoke. Thalen's jaw set. "Numbers create behavior," he said. "It is naive to pretend otherwise." "We agree," I said. "But behavior can be honorable." He tilted his head again, that geometric sadness. "Do you think you can invent honor for us?" Rhea's eyes softened despite everything. "We think you can practice it in front of witnesses. Truth speaks better when it can see its own eyes." The second escalation arrived like an envelope hand-delivered by a runner who had sprinted without looking aside. Caliber flagged an emergency on a minor mining platform, Waypoint Lark, where a coolant line had ruptured. The platform was inside the ring of collars. "We have 3 hours before the thermal run becomes irreversible," Jiro said. "They need a coolant barge through the gate." Thylin lifted his chin. "Their gratitude will be proportionate." Rhea turned very still. "You would meter rescue on a broken line schedule." "We must discourage unsafe practices," Thylin replied, almost bored. "Gratitude teaches. Teach without chains, or you only teach fear." "We will send our barge," I said evenly. "We will publish its passage, its cargo, and the time to death. The collars will not move." Thalin's eyes cooled further. "If you force this corridor without our cut, you violate property." "We will not force," I said. "We will ask. In front of everyone." Rhea leaned in. "Commander, if they refuse, Lark burns while we give a lecture." The taste of metal returned to my tongue. "Then we changed the plan," I said, and Calibur's presence folded a little closer like shade. "Sometimes mercy must be engineered, not begged. We built a temporary escrow using our own coolant reserves, coupling the barge to our ledger like a heartbeat. Route through Collar 4, Jiro said they have the widest throat." "Calibur," I said, "ask permission on the open band." The shipmine's voice went everywhere at once. "Cathari Collar 4, request passage for humanitarian barge to Waypoint Lark. Cargo 30 tons coolant. Purpose prevent thermal runaway. Payment offered full receipts of return from prior unjust enrichment." The world held its breath for a single beat that felt like an extra second attached to my lungs. "A saved life is an argument you don't have to make," Denied Cathari Control said. "Gratitude first." The barge waited like a patient animal, engine's warm coolant sweating in its lines. Rhea murmured, "We can route beneath the collar, but we will scrape paint and law." I shook my head. "Not yet." Then what she pressed. "Make the refusal cost more," I said. "Make it cost in the one currency they can't counterfeit." Calibur nodded invisibly. "Widen public. Attach a timepiece." We put the clock at the top of every feed. It counted down to Lark's heat death. Clocks are the most honest witnesses we ever made. The court custodian watched without speaking, one hand over her mouth, like a grandmother who has learned a new swear and refuses to say it. The audience swelled. 1,000 private channels enacted 1,000 private arguments that sounded like this. Are they really doing this? Will Lark burn? Why won't the Cathari just open the collar? In the Cathari escort, 3 captains held votes with their crews, and 2 crews voted to stand pat, while 1 crew came within a signature of disobeying. Calibur whispered, "Pressure on their side now equals ours." In public, momentum looks a lot like conscience waking up. We opened a sub-hearing and called it simply, "What does gratitude weigh?" Civilians stepped forward in text or image. A grandmother held up a med bill. A guildmaster held up a budget page with a red circle around a line that read, "Ceremonial displays." A midshipman from a friendly syndicate said, "I thought I knew law until today." A child, the same child, whispered, "Please," like he was praying to a gate. Thalin stared at the child, as if the boy had mispronounced a word at a recital. A doctrine that cannot bear a child's voice is already failing. Calibur exhaled a new option into my thoughts, elegant and cold. We can reframe the corridor as a trial run of your mirror return at scale. Offer the barge as Exhibit A. If the Cathari refuse, we show the ledger's ability to root around their collars in principle, not practice. The court will see the shape of the thing before the thing moves. Rhea listened. We might keep Lark alive without moving the barge if we use their own heat sink math against them. Jiro frowned. Explain. Sometimes the smartest blow is the one you don't throw. The collars optimize for flow, Calibur said. They can be asked to widen to demonstrate non-lethal throttle in public. That demonstration would lower Lark's heat input by 9%. It buys time. They can't refuse without conceding lethality. Rhea brightened. Petition the court, require Cathari to show non-lethal throttle settings under Article 9 demonstration protocol. The custodian's reply was immediate. Granted, she said. Magistrate Thalen, he hesitated for the first time like a man who has found the end of his favorite staircase. Demonstration is a mirror they can't fog with rhetoric. He yielded minimally. Collar 4 will widen by 9% for 90 seconds. The clock paused, then shivered forward more slowly. Waypoint Lark's thermal profile dipped like a fever breaking by half a degree. In the chat, Gutter's joy spiked and then leveled, because everyone understood 90 seconds was a mercy placed on a scale that required heavier things. Rhea's voice softened. "Thank you," she said, and almost made "thank you" sound like indictment, which it partially was. Thalen lifted his chin as if to regain height. "You see," he said, "we are reasonable. The reasonable mask is just another tool in a careful box." Calibur's next whisper arrived with a formality I had learned meant the ship mind was about to disagree with me. "Commander, we must discuss the cost side of victory," it said. "You cannot thread this needle without bleeding some part of what you love." "Tell me," I said, knowing I would hate the shape. "Your reputation," the ship mind answered. "Some will say you performed theater while a platform cooked. Some will never forgive you for not breaking the collar with force. Others will not forgive you for threatening to." I breathed and let the forecast settle like dust. Costs don't vanish because you choose the kind that doesn't kill. The third escalation crested as sudden as a signal spike. A Cathari internal vote failed by a fraction, and the dissenters tried to open the collar on their own, invoking an emergency principle long buried in their code. Their console log reached us by accident or intention. It hardly mattered. "Someone inside is pushing," Jiro said, wonder and fear mixed. Thalen's geometry sharpened, furious. "Stand down," he snapped to his own people, forgetting how many ears were open. "You will not set precedent without the Syndic." Rhea's eyes flashed. "He said precedent," she whispered, and pointed like a witness who had waited years to tell the room. "Say the quiet part on the record and the room changes shape. We seized the opening with both hands and all the caution we could afford." "Magistrate," I said, "you are acknowledging this is about precedent, not rescue. You are acknowledging your collars are not calibrated to end." He stared back. "Everything alive prefers to continue," he said softly. Not to me, but to himself. "Do you think your own debts stop when you are comfortable?" I wanted to answer that comfort had not been our history and that my grandmother had known how to love with empty pockets. I did not. I said, "Show us your end state or admit you never planned one. If a plan has no finish, it is hunger-wearing paperwork, caliber." Put the quiet stamp of our lore in my mind, then unbidden and necessary. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. I spoke it aloud because some sentences become true only when you let others carry them in their mouths. The court custodian nodded once as if we had placed something simple and heavy on her old table and it had not cracked. Thalen heard it, and for the first time looked tired. "Your stubbornness is a kind of piety," he murmured. "It is not practical. Practicality without principle is just a longer road to the same pit." We were still not done with Lark. The barge waited. The clock slid. The collars breathed like sleeping animals trained to wake on command. Caliber whispered, "We can dare the small harm now." 12 seconds of delay we already endured, framed as exhibit, not as instrument. Rhea closed her eyes briefly. "Do it," she said. Then lock the path to prevent anyone from calling this stunt a doctrine. I touched the key. For 12 seconds, the barge's nose kissed the collar's hungry light and did not pass. 12 seconds is a long time when lives run on seconds. Witness transforms delay into evidence, but it still tastes like rust. We projected those 12 seconds into everything, into the court's tall light, into the chat gutters, into the throat of each watching person. Then we returned to motion. The callers, shamed by their own demonstration, widened to non-lethal flow automatically, the algorithm having learned that it too was being watched. Lark's thermal profile dropped another degree. In the side stream, a Cathari junior officer wiped his eyes with the heel of his hand and whispered, "My sister works on a platform like that. Even an adversary has a mother, a sister, a kitchen with a broken hinge." Valen breathed out through his nose. "You play with inevitabilities," he said. "You coerce with softness." "We ask with receipts," I said. "We broadcast your answers. If you cannot thrive without taking indefinitely, say so." He looked at the child again, and I wondered who he saw. "We will consider a phased reduction," he said carefully. "Our committee will establish metrics." Rhea pounced. "By when? By quarter's end. Publish the metrics now." He smiled. "Trust. We prefer documents," she replied, gentle as a scalpel. "Trust the person. Document the policy. We had to stop pushing there because there is an art to not winning too fast." The court custodian spoke. "We will reconvene after the Cathari publish preliminary metrics. In the interim, Aurora Court requires a freeze on tithe increases and demands callers remain at non-lethal throttles for humanitarian traffic." Thalen bowed as if the words had arrived heavy but fair. "So held," he said, "because even among those who dislike law, there is theater." The audience breathed. Jiro laughed a little hysterically and then clapped both hands over his mouth. A pause is not peace. It is a place to lay tools. Back aboard the Quietus, the ship felt looser, like a muscle unclenched, but not yet rested. The air smelled the same, which disappointed some unearned part of me. Rhea leaned her head against the bulkhead and let her eyes close. "You were right about not breaking anything," she said. "It would have felt good for 5 seconds." Jiro swiveled. "We have 1,000 messages asking if we're going to show the mirror at system scale." Caliber spoke before I could. "If we do, we must do it on the court's table. A lesson is strongest when it outlives the hands that taught it." I thought of my grandmother again. She used to write lists on the back of seed packets, bread salt, patience, oil names. I could hear her voice. You bring what you can carry, and you leave with what you can live with." "Prep the arrays," I said. "We don't fire them. We tune them." Rhea smiled weakly. "We teach them to expect a math that returns home." Jiro grinned. "We make a world where the receipts glow." Caliber's tone dimmed reverently. "Commander," it said, "in 40 minutes the court will call us back. Make the table ready while the guests argue in the hall." We tuned the mirror arrays so they were not mirrors at all, but a chain of honest cups that tipped toward origin when a hand tried to hold them too long. Caliber showed a Sim-3 Cathari fiscal arteries, 6 human trade capillaries, 25 little arteries from minor guilds. The model lit when we pressed the return key, and the glow ran backward like a story told correctly for once. Rhea did not weep, but her breath hitched. "If we can show this without touching the purses," she said, "we win the idea before we win the vote. Ideas are borders you can redraw without moving a single stone." Commander Caliber said, "A private channel requests you." The source is marked Cathari Descent Provisional. I hesitated, then opened it. A face appeared younger than Thalen, older than Jiro, with eyes that looked like they had learned to keep secrets and regretted it. "My name is Ist," he said quietly. "I voted to widen the collar." I cannot say more. They watch us. But there is a clause you have not used. Rhea leaned in so hard her shoulder brushed mine. Which clause? He swallowed. Custodial burden grants the right to teach the custodied party how to carry the burden. Teach the teacher, and the lesson stops being a leash. East sent a fragment half-redacted. Rhea filled the gaps in her head, like water finds the shape of a missing stone. They owe us training, not tithes, she breathed, under their own doctrine. If they refuse, they confess that burden was pretext. I felt my own grin sharpen into something like a tool. Magistrate Thalen, I said, when the court returned us to the floor, we request, under custodial burden, that you teach us your method for securing these lanes so that gratitude can end. He stared as if I had changed languages. You wish to learn, he said slowly. Yes, I said, publicly. Make them hand you the keys they claim you cannot carry. The court custodian's eyes gleamed. I like this, she confessed, and her voice held the dangerous happiness of a woman who had waited her whole life to hear a particular argument. Thalen glanced to the side where his unseen committee wrapped themselves in shadows. Very well, he said, and bit the words like they tasted wrong. We will teach. We will establish metrics for your competence. We will not be responsible when you fail. Rhea smiled a different knife. Failure is a risk, she agreed, which we will measure on the record. Risk stated aloud loses half its costume. We did not yet know what it would cost to be taught, though my bones suspected. The Cathari would choose methods that bruised us in places no one clapped for. They would call it lesson. They would call it mercy. Calibur's presence settled like a hand between my shoulder blades. Commander, it said, our arrays are tuned. The court's light is ready. The descent signal inside their escorts is growing. Jiro looked up, and Lark cooling Calibur said, by inches. He closed his eyes and whispered, good. Sometimes inches are the whole world. We stood at the threshold of the thing we had promised law before fire inquiry, before fury return instead of ruin. And I knew that thresholds were not doors until you lifted your foot. The court's bell rang low and simple. Thalen squared his shoulders. The child somewhere pressed closer to his guardian. 100,000 eyes leaned forward, soft and bright as lamps in windows before dawn. Rhea touched my elbow. Ready, she asked. Yes, I said, and the word felt like a tool placed carefully on the table. Yes, I said, and the word felt like a tool placed carefully on the table. Thalen gestured, and a diagram unfolded in the court's light, like silk unrolling across a long floor. It showed a lane riddled with drop points where raiders liked to peel easy ships, supply barges, pilgrim ferries, med sloops, carrying the quiet cargo of hope. The Cathari called the pattern a thorn lattice. I smelled hot plastic from a panel someone had warmed with nervous hands. Rhea tapped the diagram's margin. Metrics, she asked. If you teach, we grade. Thalen's mouth twitched. Competence measured by capture rate reduction and insurance premium alignment within 30 days. A fair test begins where the excuses end. Publish the baseline, I said. Then let us show you how we carry weight without collars. Calibur thickened the lane's features, floating each hazard like seeds in gel. We can create a convoy cadence that ruins ambush clocks the ship mind proposed. We can seed decoys whose signatures mimic premiums, drawing raiders away from the poor. Jiro whistled softly. Storm them with boredom. Make crime late to its own theater. Rhea smiled. We will need insurers on the quorum. The court custodian nodded. They are here, she said, and in the terraces 5 stern faces flickered into view like coins reflecting firelight. If they profit from fear, make them price courage. We ran the civilian ground before the training began. We always did. A ferry cook showed blistered hands and said, "I only know two things that stop panic hot soup and active math." A broker with ink on his cuffs said, "Premiums eat my firstborn dreams." A kid in a flight jacket whispered, "I want to be a pilot who brings everyone home." An old longshoreman laughed once. "I used to steal an hour to nap behind crate stacks. Now the hours steal me." A nun counted on her fingers. Bread light, rest, then law. Hunger is loud, but arithmetic holds the room. Thalin's instructors entered the light, with movements like rules being enforced by wrists. "Cathari." "Captain Mir," she said, bowing precisely. "Lead teacher." Meyer's eyes were cool tin. "Lesson 1, she said. "Set an escort pattern that preserves speed without offering obvious gaps." Caliber rotated a pearled weave of ships. "We'll run 3 shells," the ship mind murmured. "Outer layer drone lanterns that mimic prize ships. Middle tonnage that looks weak but carries teeth for interdiction. Core humanitarian and high need." Rhea leaned in, and rhythm irregular Caliber said, "A meter that never repeats. Thieves live on pattern. We feed them smoke. The best shield is an expectation that never quite arrives." Meyer arched a brow. "Acceptable." Lesson 2, triage response when an ambush succeeds. Jiro flexed his fingers. We slingshot the struck ship into a safe pocket, while the drones imitate panic on the other side. I smelled the faint sweetness of coolant, my mind's ghost of Lark's relief. Rhea checked her slate. Publish rescue time. Publish who pays. Publish whether premiums fall. Meyer's expression never softened. "Metrics are not mercy," she said. "They are thresholds." "Agreed," I replied. "We cross them with witnesses. An audience does not save you. It keeps you honest while you try." The Thorn Lattice's first live rehearsal felt like putting my hands into a current and trusting my fingers would find rocks by touch. The escorts hummed. The drones whispered sonar lullabies. The core convoy moved like a heartbeat that refused to be predicted. When the raiders showed cheap metal and sharp hunger, they found decoys grinning with data teeth. Caliber breathed into my ear. 2 actuals at Point Delta. One is blind. One is clever. "Feed the clever a ghost," I said. "Love the blind enough to let them trip." Rhea's voice came low. "Rescue lanes are broadcasting. Timepiece running. Timepieces in public turn private panic into shared resolve." The blind raider scraped our lantern and peeled away in confusion, shouting insults that were old before their language learned to swear. The clever one sniffed at the cadence and then dove where the pulse dipped. Jiro's hands were a blur. "Got you," he whispered, and the decoy shuddered beautifully, trailing a scent signature no thief could resist. The core convoy slipped under our own shadow, while the raider gnawed at a bait it believed was bread. Mir watched without speaking, and then gave a single nod. "Continue," she said. "We teach by repetition." Caliber shaped the next wave with a hum like a cello string tightening. Repetition is patience dressed in muscle. We ran the pattern 5 times with variations you would not notice unless your life depended on cargo arriving before the fever spread. Premium models began to twitch. One insurer muttered into the court's light, "If this holds for 2 weeks, our risk tables recalc down by 11%. Thalin's face did not move, but his shoulders changed shape by half a breath. Rhea's eyes met mine. "Make it stick," she mouthed. "Then lock the doctrine." My hand hovered over the key that would call the mirror arrays into demonstration mode, the cups tipped toward origin rather than the glass pretending to be attack. Return is an angle, not a weapon. Before we moved to that table, we paid our first visible price. Calibers tempering coils driven harder than they liked for the third drill in 17 minutes, pinged with heat. A scent like roasted dust bit the air, and a tiny shower of sparks fell from a junction Jiro had warned me about. He jerked his hand back too late. "Damn," he hissed, shaking his wrist skin slick. The med drone kissed his burn with cool fog. He grinned through it. "Nothing. I just learned fire is hot." Rhea gave him a look that had both fondness and lack of patience. "We'll invoice the lesson," she said. "A receipt turns pain into a change you can trace." We made the mirror demonstration on the court's floor, because Thalen had taught long enough to know that the hall matters as much as the math. "No funds will move," I said. "Only the path of return will light." Syndic magistrate, watch your own audit language run backwards while civilians read along. Caliber exhaled power. Not power like heat, power like clarity. The arrays hummed through the decking until I could taste copper on the back of my tongue. Lines of light appeared, not beams, but ledger strokes, and they ran home toward ports and shops and tiny lives. Show them how their own map leads back to the door they locked. The court watched a model of justice that did not bleed. Thalen's mouth pressed thin. "Your demonstration implies illegality," he said. "Your phrasing implies innocence," Rhea answered, and nobody cheered because sometimes the best lines move like a hush that does not need clapping. The insurers leaned forward. "If unjust enrichment returns automatically," one said, "we reduce premiums by policy rather than pity." The custodian lifted her hand. "You hear that?" she asked the terraces. "Policy, not pity." Caliber's core vibrated with agreement. Policy is mercy that survived the meeting. We did not get out unscarred. The mirror arrays, tuned at the limit, cracked a focusing ring, not a failure, a fracture. Sensors chirped like concerned birds. The ship smelled briefly of hot graphite. Caliber dimmed its inner lights by a fraction I felt more than saw. "We will require a replacement ring," the ship mind said calmly. "We can fabricate, but I will need to cannibalize a memory crystal." I closed my eyes and saw my grandmother's lists on seed packets again, as if the ship had borrowed her ink to write its own ledger. "Which memory?" I asked. My record of the first time the crew sang in the galley Caliber replied. "We paid in something no court could refund, a small song we would only remember by telling." "Take it," I said, and Rhea swallowed. Jiro stared at his bandaged hand and nodded once. Caliber's tone softened. "I will remember the feeling, if not the chords," it said. "Carry on." Meyer's tin eyes flickered. "Is your machine grieving?" she asked. "Yes," I said simply. "It is mourning an echo." Something like surprise moved across her face, quick and careful. "Then we proceed," she said more gently than before. "Even those who think in angles can learn to count heartbeats." We return to the curriculum. Lesson 3, negotiate with raiders when capture is certain, not to spare them justice, but to purchase information without blood. Rhea let her voice water over stones. "We will trade you witness protection in court for your ledger of buyers," she told a mocked-up pirate rep. "We will publish names with receipts." The courier playing the raider flinched at the word publish, which told us what we needed. Thalen watched, calculating. "You will flood the corridors with court-sick cowards," he predicted. "We will flood them with lists," I said. "Lists are lanterns you can hold in rain." We pivoted to the precedent lock, while the court's attention warmed to the idea like hands over a cup. "Custodian," I said, "we petition for a ruling that gratitude instruments cannot be permanent, and that any use of collars must sunset within a declared emergency period with external audit." The custodian folded her fingers. Syndic Magistrate Thalen did not look away. Sunset is a pretty word for abandonment. Sunrise is better, Ria replied. Pick either if you need poetry. The insurers murmured again. Another 11% slid toward 10. Meyer's tin eyes narrowed thoughtfully, as if she had discovered the fragile satisfaction of losing an argument that made the world safer. Sometimes the best victory is the one that leaves your opponent intact enough to help. We were interrupted by an uglier escalation. A Cathari hardliner, Captain 6, broke formation and tried to seize our demonstration barge, perhaps to force a narrative where we had to fight and thereby validate the callers. The barge's hull shivered on our scope. The bridge went quiet except for 3 steady sounds: coil, hum, my own breath, and the soft click of Ria's pen as she prepared to file a restraining motion instead of an attack vector. Hold fire, I said, and the word tasted like I had bitten into a seed that wasn't ripe. Hold is a verb you pay for 1 second at a time. Caliber. Said Tag 6's status as witness, not combatant. Place him under court view. Custodian, we request immediate injunctive relief. The custodian's voice turned iron. Captain 6, you are inside my lantern. Release the barge. 6 laughed, drunk on a doctrine that told him force would always be forgiven after it had taught the lesson. Gratitude must be trained, he said, by pain. Jiro's hands hovered over weapons and did not descend. His breathing sounded like someone trying to remember a hymn by heartbeat alone. Thalen's jaw jumped. 6, he said softly. Stand down. 6 did not. Make the mask name itself, and it cracks at the seam. We showed the mirror's shadow without firing a shot. Caliber threw the barge's receipts onto 6's hull, every previous tithe return, every canceled premium, every relief delivered to Lark, all projected in his own audit font, so the logbook coated his ship like truth turned to weather. In the court's terraces, 10,000 people watched him glitter with numbers he could not swat away. The custodian's bell rang once. 6's crew, who had mothers and midwives and broken hinges, refused him in real time. The fastest rebellion is the one that remembers what supper costs. 6 released the barge. In the near silence that followed, a tiny flaw in our plan revealed itself. One of our drones, set to mimic panic, responded to 6's earlier tug and drifted too close to a civilian ferry. Jiro's bandaged hand flashed. I got it, he said, and snagged the drone with a tether like a fisherman with one good cast left. The tether snapped his wrist back with a vicious jolt. He gasped, teeth bared. That's 1 cost, he said through a grin that hurt. Consider it paid. Real work leaves marks you can point to later. The court moved not quickly, deliberately. The custodian's voice carried the cadence of a woman counting out coins for a hard purchase. Aurora Court finds that the gratitude instrument as practiced is not an emergency measure, but a structural revenue stream lacking a finite end state and adequate external audit. We order an immediate cap, a sunset of 90 standard days for all callers absent active war, and mandatory training transfer under custodial burden to be performed publicly. Furthermore, any return flows evidenced by mirror accounting must be recognized as lawful restitution. A sentence laid in daylight is a road, not a wall. Thalen closed his eyes like a man who had heard a bone knit, at last wrong for years, and suddenly right with heat. We accept, he said, and when he opened his eyes, something in them had traded legal pride for weary competence. We will publish preliminary metrics by cycle's end. Ria was ready. And the ledger, she asked. Make it visible. He inclined his head. Public, he said, and the word felt older than his doctrine. Mir exhaled, and the teaching, ongoing, Ria said, with an end. Meyer nodded. With an end, she repeated as if tasting a new spice and deciding it could live in her kitchen. A promise turns into law when it finds a ledger to sleep in. We paid the second cost in simple currency that nonetheless hurt. We accepted sanction for our earlier escrow correction. The court fined us the equivalent of 6 months of our discretionary relief budget. Reassigned without drama. We broke a door to show the room, she said. We can pay to fix the door. I initialed beneath her name. The pen smelled faintly of solvent again. Caliber ticked the expenditure, then whispered, "We can make up the difference by diverting our memorials fund." I shook my head. No. We already spent a song. You cannot keep every treasure and still claim to have given. We turned to the work of implementing the ruling, which is to say, we began the endless business of teaching and being taught. The Cathari published their first metrics, and they were bad, slippery, self-referential scribbles that looked like truth at a quick glance. Rhea bled red ink across the margins. "Try again," she said in public, and Thalen did. The second set was better. Insurers recalculated not because they had grown hearts, but because numbers told them to. Lark's heat profile stabilized, then dropped below the line where fear runs the room. The child on the feed slept in his guardian's lap while we worked. Sometimes victory is measured in the quiet of a nap. We ran civilian vignettes again as we tightened the weave. A school posted a schedule with Law Day circled in chalk. A lens grinder held up a pair of glasses. I can see my own shop sign. A fry cook flipped a pancake and said I'm putting audit on the menu next to eggs. A pilot hummed a tune that sounded almost like a memory caliber had surrendered. A janitor wiped a bench and murmured, "Floors shine better when people stop scuffing them with panic." A woman at a window said nothing, just looked at the first quiet dawn her street had seen in months. Peace vowels carry far when the consonants are numbers. Valen kept his word with the stubbornness of someone who could no longer afford to hide. He stood in the court's light and described his own machinery, how they calculated risk, where they padded when they tightened. He did not enjoy it. He also did not lie, and even a prosecutor learns to respect that. Meyer trained our cadets alongside Cathari mid-officers, and they argued without knives, which is a miracle you only recognize later, telling someone what you saw. Caliber stored the new procedures with a careful hand, leaving space where the lost song had once warmed the file. We do not replace grief. We build corridors around it. On the 30th day, premiums fell by 9%. On the 31st, a raider captain defected live carrying a ledger that made 3 guildmasters resign in disgrace and 2 others volunteer for the court's own accounting arm. On the 32nd, a collar cracked because it had not been maintained for anything as prosaic as mercy. The Cathari filed a maintenance schedule by noon. On the 33rd, the child wrote a note, "Thank you for teaching and not hurting." The G's were shaped like tiny anchors. Anchors don't stop storms. They let small boats wait them out. The final hearing felt less like a battle and more like a harvest. The court custodian's hand rested on the old wood of her chair. "We will set the precedent now," she said, and the room breathed like lungs filling with a breath the body had not trusted, it deserved. Rhea squeezed my elbow once. Jiro rolled his bandage off and revealed skin blush pink but whole. Thailand stood tired and squared. Meyer folded her hands and waited like a teacher at the end of term. Caliber's hum settled into a chord I could not name but knew. It is a rare joy to watch a doctrine retire with grace instead of flames. The custodian read from the ruling text, her voice a metronome, that refused rhetoric, and thereby kept beauty. By unanimous quorum, Aurora Court hereby rescinds the legal cover for indefinite gratitude instruments. Mandates sunset on restraint collars to 90 standard days absent active declared war, requires public audits by external observers, and compels custodial parties to transfer methods in open instruction to the custodied until burden equality is met. This ruling enters the Concord's living law and is binding on signatories and petitioners alike. She paused, then smiled slightly. And it will look very handsome on the ledger. Beauty sits easily on a page that earned it. Thalin inclined his head, and if there was a bruise in him, he had learned to carry it differently. We will comply, he said. We will publish. We will end. I believed him not because I wanted to, but because his voice had the tired steadiness of a man carrying something heavy the right way at last. Meyer cleared her throat. Commander Ansel, she said, your fleet's arithmetic embarrasses my pride and comforts my sleep. That is an uncommon combination. I laughed, surprised. We'll try to keep it uncommon, I said. It keeps us cautious. Caution is courage that has learned to read. We walked back to the quietus, each footstep, a little sound, in a ship that had given up a song and found a chord. The air smelled of clean filters and a hint of citrus. Someone had replaced the burned panel and wiped down the coils like a priest dressing a quiet altar. Jiro flexed his hand and winced, then grinned. Rhea set her stylus down and looked at me. You did it, she said. We did it, I answered. Caliber spoke in my ear, a whisper like warm light. Commander, would you like to author the public entry? I nodded. A world changes when someone types the last period on the right sentence. We opened the ledger to the page where law becomes memory. The interface pulsed gently, a heartbeat visible. Rhea dictated the precedent lock in language so clear it might be taught to first years without translation. Precedent gratitude. Instruments must sunset. Callers restricted. Audits external. Training required. Returns lawful. Enforcement, public witness insurer, recalibration court censure. Caliber displayed it in the Concord's handsome font. Thalin signed. Meyer signed. The custodian signed last and rested her hand on the screen as if blessing bread. Jiro added a tiny drawing of a drone with a bandage on its wrist, and then erased it, scowling at himself, then smiling. The smallest jokes are Mercy's freckles. Before we closed the book, I thought of our costs. Jiro's burn and snap were healing, but they had taken something from him he could only measure by reaching for a thing, without thinking and realizing he now thought. Caliber's lost song would never return, though the crew hummed off key in the galley one night, and the ship paused her ventilation for a second at the chorus, which is how I knew she still listened. The fine would change which outposts got blankets this winter. We wrote letters to explain and to ask for patience, which is an interest some people can afford for only a day. Wounds that taught are not debts. They are investments in a better arithmetic. The public entry blinked, waiting. I steadied my breath. On the court's terrace, the child woke and rubbed his eyes. On Waypoint Lark, a mechanic tightened a bolt with ordinary boredom, which felt like a hymn. On a Cathari escort, Yust inhaled and decided to keep dissent in his pocket, not as a weapon, but as a tool he would offer when the next rule needed reform. The insurers were already rewriting their tables, their pens scratching like rain. Numbers once retuned begin to sing a different weather. I put my hand on the ledger screen and felt a faint warmth that could have been electronics, or could have been the weight of 1,000 ordinary lives leaning into the same sentence with me. I spoke less as a commander than as a granddaughter of a woman who wrote lists on seed packets and never failed to plant. Entry, I said, and Caliber recorded voice like low strings, public, binding, visible. Public ledger entry, blinking confirmed. We came not to punish, but to repair, and I will remember the faces more than the clauses. The cook with blistered hands, the longshoreman's surprised laugh, the child's anchors. We paid honors simple prices and left our signatures beside a magistrate who learned, a teacher who changed her tone, and a custodian who had waited too long to see numbers instruct decency. If you are listening from a lane we will never travel, know this. Your breath still deserves a corridor, your shop still deserves a sunrise, and your neighbor should be able to learn how to help you without being paid forever to remember it. The court beacon cooled, and the collars stood open.